The Epic of Atra-Hasis is one of the oldest known stories of a great flood and the origins of humanity, originating in ancient Mesopotamia. This Akkadian epic was first written down around the 18th century BCE on clay tablets. It is named after its human hero, Atra-Hasis, whose name means exceedingly wise. The epic was recorded in Old Babylonian and later Assyrian versions, with fragments discovered by archaeologists in the 19th century, notably in the library of Assyrian king Ashurbanipal. Modern scholars have pieced together the tablets to reconstruct the full narrative. The story begins before humans existed. In a time after the creation of the world, the gods themselves had to do all the work in the world. The great gods, known as the Anunnaki, made the lesser gods, called the Igigi, perform laborious tasks to maintain the earth. These tasks included digging watercourses, rivers, and canals to irrigate the land, hard toil that went on day and night. According to the epic's opening lines, when the gods, instead of man, did the work and bore the loads, the gods' load was too great, the work too hard, the trouble too much. The junior gods labored for years under these harsh conditions, maintaining the life of Mesopotamia by literally shaping its rivers and fields. After 40 years of ceaseless labor, the Igigi could no longer endure the toil. They grew weary and resentful, feeling their burden was unbearable. Their discontent culminated in a bold decision: rebellion. One night, under cover of darkness, the frustrated lower gods put aside their tools, set fire to their spades and work baskets, and marched as an angry mob to the dwelling of Enlil, the high god in charge of the earth. Enlil's grand house, called the Ekur, was surrounded by the rebelling gods in the middle of the night. The text vividly describes how the unrested gods gathered at Enlil's gate, ready for confrontation. Enlil, often depicted as the chief deity and ruler of the world, awoke to find his abode under siege by his own divine workforce. Enlil was taken by surprise to see the revolt of the Igigi. He realized that the lesser gods' grievances were serious. They had openly declared, "Our forced labor was heavy, our misery too much." Rather than crush the uprising by force, the wise Enlil sought a resolution that would avoid further violence among the gods. He convened an emergency council of the senior gods. Enlil called upon Anu, the sky god and supreme father of the gods, and Enki, also known as Ea, the god of wisdom and waters. Together, the great gods discussed how to solve the crisis. Enlil's counselor Nusku first tried to negotiate with the rebels, asking who instigated the revolt and why. The answer was clear: all the worker gods stood together, demanding relief from their endless drudgery. The stage was set for a profound decision, one that would change the fate of the world. Facing the Igigi's revolt, the assembly of great gods came up with a radical solution. They would create a new being to take over the labor. This idea was proposed by Enki, the god of wisdom, who empathized with the Igigi's plight. Enki declared that the gods needed a lesser being to bear the yoke of work in place of the gods. The mother goddess Mami, also known as Nintu or Belet Ili, who presided over birth and creation, was present in the council. Enki addressed her with a plan: let her create a human, a man, that he may bear the load of the gods. The gathered deities agreed that creating humankind was the answer to end the divine labor dispute. However, making a new creature was no simple task. It required a sacrifice from the gods themselves. Enki and Mami prepared a special ritual to give life to the first humans. They decided that one of the gods would be slain, and his blood and flesh would be used to form the new beings. A god named We-Ilu, Ilawela, described as a deity who had sense, i.e., endowed with intelligence, was chosen and sacrificed for this purpose. Enki and Mami then took clay from the earth, mixing it with the blood, flesh, and essence of the slain god. By combining divine substance with earthly clay, they shaped the first human beings. According to the myth, Mami recited incantations and pinched off 14 pieces of clay, creating 7 men and 7 women to begin the human race. In some versions, it's suggested that only one man was created initially, and then, perhaps realizing he was lonely, the gods provided him with a wife. The text in this part is fragmentary. Either way, the outcome is that humankind was born from this divine act of creation, meant to toil in place of the gods. When the first human awoke to life, the mother goddess Mami brought a basket into his hands, a symbol that he was to carry the burden of labor. She taught the humans how to work the fields, dig the canals, and tend the land on behalf of the gods. The plan had succeeded. The lesser gods were freed from their toil, and the humans would now maintain the world. To celebrate this momentous event, the gods blessed the new human couple. The couple was encouraged to procreate, and according to one part of the story, they observed a 7-day celebration in honor of the goddess Ishtar, goddess of fertility and love, to ensure successful fertility. In time, the humans indeed multiplied and spread across the land, taking up the labor that once burdened the Igigi. The gods returned to their rest and leisure, satisfied that their work was now in mortal hands. For a time, there was peace and balance. The gods enjoyed their freedom from hard labor, and humans dutifully worked the earth. As the generations of humans continued, they multiplied rapidly. The epic notes that after 1,200 years, the population of humans had grown enormously. The land was filled with people, and with people came the sounds of daily life, chatter, laughter, cries, the bustle of a growing society. To the gods above, this constant noise from earth became a new irritation. The text describes humans roaming around like roaring herds of cattle, making such a ruckus that the gods in heaven could no longer even sleep. Enlil, the chief god who had orchestrated the creation of humans, now found himself increasingly annoyed by his creatures. The very solution that solved one problem, the gods' labor, created another, overpopulation and disturbance. Enlil grew restless and angry at the ceaseless din rising from earth. The epic portrays Enlil as a deity who values order and quiet. The clamor of humanity was disrupting the gods' peace. He decided it was time to curb the human population and silence the noise. Enlil's first course of action was to send a plague upon humanity. He summoned Namtar, the god of plague and death, and unleashed a deadly sickness, described as a frost fever, on the people. Soon, a terrible pandemic spread among humans, and vast numbers began to perish. The once loud cities and fields fell into despair as illness swept through, fulfilling Enlil's intent to drastically reduce the population. This was the first of Enlil's punitive measures against humankind, a divine attempt at mass extinction by disease. Up to this point, the humans had been largely passive characters in the story, but now the epic introduces its hero, Atra-Hasis, the wise man of Shuruppak. Atra-Hasis was not an ordinary human. He was a loyal servant of the god Enki, and his name, exceedingly wise, reflects his reputation for insight. Some traditions describe him as a priest-king of the city of Shuruppak on the Euphrates River. When the plague struck, it was Atra-Hasis who led the response of humanity. Desperate and suffering, people turned to the gods for help, and Atra-Hasis was the mediator who could speak to the gods. Atra-Hasis prayed especially to Enki/Ea, the creator and benefactor of humanity. Enki had always been fond of his human creation. After all, it was he who proposed and helped create them, and he did not agree with Enlil's harsh methods. Seeing the plight of the people, Enki decided to secretly aid Atra-Hasis in countering Enlil's plague. Enki advised Atra-Hasis on a clever plan to end the epidemic. He told him to stop all offerings and worship to every god except Namtar, the plague god. Atra-Hasis gathered the people and followed Enki's guidance. They ceased prayers and sacrifices to the other gods, instead directing all their rituals and reverence to Namtar alone. This plan had the desired effect. Namtar, flattered by the sudden exclusive devotion, became pleased and prideful. As the humans implored Namtar for mercy and showered him with offerings, the plague god's wrath subsided. In fact, Namtar was so honored by being worshipped above all other gods that he called off the plague he was inflicting. The deadly fever abated, and humanity was saved from annihilation by disease. Enlil's first attempt to reduce the humans had been thwarted by Atra-Hasis's wisdom and Enki's covert help. Life returned to normal, and humans resumed multiplying, but Enlil was not finished with his efforts to quiet the world. Enlil observed with dismay that humankind survived the plague and continued to proliferate. As more years passed, another 1,200-year interval, according to the myth, The population was again very large. The noise on earth rose once more like a clamor to the heavens. Determined to enforce some control, Enlil plotted a second calamity. This time he chose to strike at the humans' food supply and environment, to weaken them through starvation. First, Enlil enlisted the help of the god Adad, the deity of storms and weather. Enlil caused the rains to cease and the skies to withhold their nourishment. Adad brought forth a severe drought upon the earth. With no rain, the crops withered and the fields turned dry. For years, the land suffered under scorching conditions, and hunger began to spread among mankind. Then Enlil doubled this effort by involving Nisaba, the goddess of grain and fertility of the fields. He sent Nisaba to blight the harvests and ensure that the soil remained barren. The combined effect was a devastating famine. What the drought did not kill, the failing crops finished. People and animals starved as food grew scarce. Once again, the human population fell into crisis, and once again, Atra-Hasis sought Enki's guidance. The clever Enki provided a similar strategy as before: instruct the people to worship only the two responsible gods, Adad and Nisaba, and to neglect all others. Though it might seem counterintuitive to honor the very gods bringing disaster, the plan was to shame them and compel their pity. Atra-Hasis convened the people to perform exclusive sacrifices to Adad for rain and to Nisaba for grain, while ignoring the rest of the pantheon so those gods would receive no offerings. The tactic worked. Adad and Nisaba became ashamed at receiving special treatment, while their fellow gods were being ignored and left to starve of worship. Moved by this, and perhaps feeling guilty for the suffering they caused, both deities withdrew their punishments. Rain clouds gathered again, breaking the drought, and the earth's fertility was slowly restored. The famine ended, and humanity once more narrowly escaped extinction. Atra-Hasis's devotion and cunning, backed by Enki's counsel, had saved humankind for a second time. By now, Enlil was furious. Not only had his attempts to cull the human population been foiled twice, but it was evident that Enki was undermining the plan at every turn. Enlil saw Enki's hand in how the humans always knew exactly which god to appease. A great tension grew between the two gods: Enlil, the frustrated overlord seeking order, and Enki, the trickster savior of humanity. Enlil convened the divine council again. This time he insisted that more extreme measures were needed, a final solution to the human problem. After the failure of plague and famine, Enlil resolved that only a cataclysmic flood could wipe out humankind once and for all. At the Council of the Gods, Enlil proposed unleashing a great deluge that would drown every living thing, silencing the noise forever. The other gods, perhaps reluctantly, agreed to this plan of total destruction. However, they were aware of Enki's past interference. To ensure that the trickster Enki would not sabotage this plan, Enlil demanded that all gods swear an oath of secrecy. Enki himself was compelled to take an oath not to warn any human about the impending flood. This oath is a crucial point in the story. It sets up how Enki will creatively bypass it. But at face value, Enki promised to remain silent. With the decision made, the gods planned the details of the flood in secret. They chose the timing and duration of the disaster carefully. The wrathful Enlil orchestrated the elements. The rain and wind would be turned into instruments of annihilation, and the very sluices of heaven, the floodgates in the sky, would be opened to pour water down without mercy. The ancient Mesopotamians imagined waters above the firmament, and by opening cosmic floodgates, the gods would let the primeval waters crash down upon the earth. This was to be no ordinary flood. It would be a deluge covering mountains and wiping out cities, returning the world to a state of watery chaos. The gods prepared to unleash Adad, the storm god, in his most ferocious aspect, along with all the forces of nature, to ensure nothing survived. Even as they agreed to this terrible plan, some of the gods felt anxious. The thought of destroying their own creation, the humans who had been serving them, was worrisome, but Enlil's authority prevailed. They all swore to go through with it, and not to aid humankind. With heavy hearts and grim resolve, the divine assembly set a date for the Great Flood. None of the humans knew what was coming, except one, who had a friend in a high place. The stage was set for Atra-Hasis's greatest test. and Enki was already thinking of how he might save his beloved humans without breaking his oath. Bound by the oath, Enki could not directly tell Atra-Hasis of the flood, yet his compassion for humankind drove him to find a loophole. Enki's ingenuity came to the forefront. He decided to communicate the warning indirectly. One night, as Atra-Hasis slept in his humble reed hut, Enki came near and began speaking not to Atra-Hasis himself, but to the walls of the hut. Enki called out to the reed walls, as if instructing them, ensuring that his words would be overheard by the wise man inside. In this way, Enki delivered a detailed warning and plan of escape without technically speaking to a human, thus keeping his oath intact. Enki's message was urgent and specific. He told the wall, and thus Atra-Hasis, that a great flood was coming, and that the man should tear down his house and build a boat. Enki instructed, "Abandon your possessions and save your life. Build a ship." The boat was to have equal length, width, and height, essentially a huge cube-shaped ark, and it must be sealed with pitch inside and out to make it waterproof. Enki stressed that the boat should have a roof like the Abzu, the subterranean ocean, to withstand the torrential waters from above. Atra-Hasis was told to make the vessel strong and watertight, capable of riding out a flood that would engulf the world. Furthermore, Enki advised Atra-Hasis on what to bring aboard. He was to take a large supply of food to outlast the storm, as well as animals. The text even humorously notes to bring animals and even some birds and fish. Essentially, Atra-Hasis was to preserve a little piece of the living world so that life could continue after the deluge. Enki also gave a critical piece of advice on timing. Atra-Hasis should watch for the appointed time and be ready to embark, counting the days carefully. The flood would begin and end within a set span, often interpreted as 7 days of storm. Upon receiving this mysterious communication, Atra-Hasis acted swiftly. He secretly began construction of the ark as instructed. The boat he built was of considerable size, a huge cubish vessel, and he used bitumen, natural asphalt, to seal the seams, ensuring it was waterproof. To explain his actions to curious neighbors, Atra-Hasis gave a deceptive answer. According to some versions of the story, he told people that Enlil was angry with him, and that he must leave home because he no longer looks kindly on his city, implying perhaps that the boat building was an act of penance or exile. In one humorous detail, Atra-Hasis hosted a large feast, a party, as the boat neared completion. He did this both to appease his community and to recruit help in finishing the ark. He invited his neighbors to eat and drink, hoping their goodwill and perhaps their labor would assist him in this urgent project. While others celebrated, Atra-Hasis himself could hardly eat or enjoy the merriment. His heart was broken and he was vomiting bile in anxiety, knowing the catastrophe that loomed. Despite his fear, Atra-Hasis completed the ark in time. At last, the day of doom arrived. The sky darkened with storm clouds as Adad, the storm god, gathered his winds. Following Enki's counsel, Atra-Hasis brought his family aboard the ark. Notably, the text mentions at least one fertile woman came with him, ensuring that humans could repopulate. Some versions imply Atra-Hasis brought his wife and children, and possibly craftsmen or others, but the numbers are not explicitly given. He also loaded the animals and provisions. When everything was ready, Atra-Hasis and those with him sealed the door with pitch, closing themselves securely inside just as the first peals of thunder roared. The flood began with an unimaginable force. The narrative describes how the floodgates of heaven were opened, unleashing a wall of water from the cosmic ocean above. At the same time, rain poured down in torrents and the winds howled. The storm god Adad brought thunder, lightning, and hurricane winds from every direction. Waters from the sky and waters from the earth, perhaps the rivers overflowing, combined into a single, overwhelming flood. The waves rose and swallowed cities and fields alike. The text vividly says the ark swirled like a pot on the waves as the floodwaters raged. Inside the ark, tossed about on the mountainous waves, Atra-Hasis and his family could only wait in darkness and pray for deliverance. Outside, all of humanity perished in the deluge. Villages, farms, and even the gods' own temples were swept away in the roaring flood. The screams of people were silenced under the depths. Even the gods were terrified by the scope of destruction they had unleashed. The epic portrays the gods as watching the catastrophe with dread and sorrow once it was underway. They hadn't anticipated the intensity of the storm's devastation. The mother goddess Mami/Belet Ili, who helped create humans, was especially grief-stricken. She wept and lamented over the drowning of her children, humankind, and berated Enlil for what was happening. In one fragment, she confronts Enlil angrily. "How could you send such a flood? Am I to give birth to people just to have them destroyed?" Her heartbreak reflects the remorse among some of the gods as they witnessed the world being destroyed. Meanwhile, Enlil himself was enraged, but not out of pity. He was furious that Atra-Hasis had survived, for he soon realized someone was afloat in an ark, thwarting his plan. Enlil's wrath burned at Enki's deception. However, in the height of the storm, there was nothing he could do about that. Other gods, in contrast, were concerned with their own predicament. They had lost the sacrifices and worship of humans. As the flood wiped out all agricultural life, there were no offerings being made, no temples active. The gods experienced hunger and longing. The epic uses a striking image. The gods gathered above the flood like flies, drawn to the scent of sacrifices that were no more. They swarmed in from all sides, desperately craving the smoke of offerings, which underscores how dependent the gods were on humans in Mesopotamian belief. This was a consequence Enlil had not fully considered. By eliminating humans, the gods had cut off their own sustenance and honor. For 7 days and 7 nights, according to the tradition, the deluge raged non-stop. This duration is attested in related flood accounts. By the end, the entire world was a vast sea of churned-up water. Eventually, the rain stopped, the winds calmed, and the flood began to subside. The Ark of Atra-Hasis, having endured the onslaught, drifted until it came to rest on a mountain. Later Mesopotamian versions name it Mount Nisir. The Epic of Atra-Hasis is fragmentary at this point, but paralleling the later Gilgamesh account which drew from it, Atra-Hasis likely waited some days and then released birds to test if the waters had receded. One bird, a dove, might have returned finding no resting place, a second, swallow, likewise, and a third, a raven, found land and did not return, indicating the floodwaters were abating. At last, Atra-Hasis could open the hatch and step out onto dry, if muddy, ground, into a world cleansed of humanity except for those few with him. When Atra-Hasis emerged from the ark, he found a drastically changed world, silent and empty. The hero's first action was an act of gratitude and piety. He prepared a sacrifice to the gods on a mountaintop altar. He offered up roasted offerings of food, sending the smoke curling up to the heavens. The reaction of the hungry gods was immediate and almost comical. The epic says the gods smelled the sweet savor of the sacrifice and swarmed like flies around the offering, eagerly eating once again. They were overjoyed to have worship resumed, and their bellies filled after the long, hungry ordeal. In that moment, the gods' anger melted into relief and affection for Atra-Hasis, the lone, reverent human who had survived. One by one, the gods descended and blessed Atra-Hasis. They acknowledged that if this wise man had not survived, no humans would be left to serve the gods or continue the relationship between divine and mortal. According to the text and related sources, the gods in their gratitude decided to reward Atra-Hasis. They granted him and his wife a special gift. The gods bestowed immortality upon Atra-Hasis, in some versions, or at least allowed him to live in an idyllic place, far from ordinary mortal life. Later Mesopotamian traditions, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, specify that the flood hero was settled in Dilmun, a paradise or distant island at the edge of the world, to live out his days in peace. Thus, Atra-Hasis, the exceedingly wise and pious man, was spared the common fate of death, a singular honor for a mortal. However, the aftermath was not all celebration. Enlil arrived as well, and he was initially not pleased. Finding that humans had survived against his will, Enlil flew into a rage at Enki for his role in saving Atra-Hasis. Enlil confronted Enki and the other gods. But Enki, ever diplomatic and clever, sought to calm Enlil and find a permanent solution to the underlying issue: human overpopulation and the resulting din that had triggered Enlil's wrath in the first place. Enki acknowledged Enlil's concerns. Indeed, without some changes, the cycle could simply repeat. So Enki proposed a compromise and a set of new rules for humanity going forward. In this new arrangement, the gods would ensure that human population growth would be kept in check without the need for constant divine massacres. Enki decreed that humans would henceforth be subject to the realities of mortal life that limit their numbers. He introduced the concept of natural suffering and death as part of the human condition. From that time on, not every pregnancy would succeed, and not every baby would live. There will be barren women, Enki declared, meaning some women would be unable to bear children. He also introduced the concept of infant mortality, and perhaps a class of women, like priestesses or devoted women, who would not marry or have children, thereby limiting population. Most importantly, Enki severely shortened the lifespan of humans. No longer would people live for hundreds of years as in the mythic past. Enki set a human lifespan to a finite limit. Later traditions say 120 years at most. With disease, natural death, and other limits now built into human existence, the population would remain manageable. These measures, Enki explained, would ensure that humans never again multiplied so recklessly as to disturb the gods with their noise. Enlil accepted this solution. His anger cooled as he realized that with these controls, the gods could have their peace without needing to resort to genocide. Enlil and Enki were reconciled, and the gods as a whole made peace with humanity. Never again, at least in Mesopotamian lore, would they attempt to exterminate all of humankind. The surviving people would rebuild the world, and life would continue under the new divine order. The flood thus marked a turning point. It was the end of the old world and the beginning of a new era where humans understood their mortality as part of the plan of the gods. The Epic of Atra-Hasis concludes with humanity saved and a new balance established between gods and people. For the ancient Mesopotamians, this story carried deep significance. It explained not only the origin of humans, created from clay and divine blood to serve the gods, but also why the world has floods, plagues, and famines, and why humans must endure suffering, hard labor, and death. In the worldview of the epic, human suffering is not senseless. It was instituted as part of the natural order to prevent overpopulation and keep peace with the divine realm. The limits on human life, our mortality, and the hardships of childbirth are thus given a cosmic justification. By linking suffering to a greater cosmic balance, the Atra-Hasis story offered comfort and understanding. The hardships people faced were part of an agreement with the gods to ensure the world's stability. The Atra-Hasis epic is also one of the earliest known accounts of a great flood in human literature. Its influence reverberated through Mesopotamian culture. Later works would borrow from it and retell its story. For example, centuries later, the Epic of Gilgamesh included a flood narrative in its tablet 11 that closely mirrors the Atra-Hasis tale, with the hero Atra-Hasis appearing under the name Utnapishtim. Fragments of Atra-Hasis were also preserved and discussed by Babylonian priests and historians, such as Berossus, in the Hellenistic era. This enduring quality shows how important the flood story was to Mesopotamians, long before similar tales appeared elsewhere. In modern times, the tablets of Atra-Hasis were discovered in the 19th and 20th centuries, and scholars were astonished to find a flood story that predated more famous accounts. The most complete tablet of Atra-Hasis was found at the site of the ancient city of Sippar in Iraq, dating to around the 17th century BCE. Today, that cuneiform tablet is kept in the British Museum, catalogued as BM 78941, and it provides a direct window into this ancient epic. Translating the cuneiform revealed the striking narrative we have recounted, one that sheds light on how early civilizations viewed their gods and the precarious place of humankind in the universe. Cuneiform tablet with the Atra-Hasis epic from Sippar, southern Iraq, circa 17th century BCE. This clay tablet, now in the British Museum, is one of the sources that preserved the Atra-Hasis flood story. The Epic of Atra-Hasis remains a powerful story. In a dramatic and imaginative way, It addresses questions that humanity has always asked. Why do we suffer? Why do disasters happen? What is our purpose? The answers it offers are framed in mythological terms. We suffer and eventually die so that the world does not become overcrowded and disturb the gods. Disasters like floods are sent as correctives when humans go too far. Our purpose is to work and worship, maintaining the gods' creations. At the same time, Atra-Hasis celebrates themes of wisdom, loyalty, and mercy. Atra-Hasis's wisdom and piety save humanity. Enki's compassion gives humans another chance, and even the high gods learn to temper justice with mercy after the flood. In conclusion, the Atra-Hasis epic is a rich Mesopotamian myth that combined a creation story, a flood apocalypse, and a theological explanation for human mortality into one grand narrative. Its influence can be seen in later legends, but even on its own, it stands as a testament to the storytelling and spiritual ideas of ancient Sumer and Babylon. Thousands of years later, we can still hear echoes of Atra-Hasis's tale every time we speak of great floods or ponder the relationship between divine will and human fate. This ancient epic, meant for an audience in a far-off time, continues to captivate us with its dramatic portrayal of gods and humans locked in an eternal dance of conflict, cooperation, and understanding. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more fascinating stories, and ring the bell so you never miss a new episode from Cypher History. Stay curious,